Today I am going to recap 2022 action crime movie titled Spiderhead. In this unique prison, criminals can have intercourse with their opposite sex at any time they desire. This has made the prison a popular destination for criminals. However, with extra liberty, there come dire consequences. At the start of the movie, a man named Ray is seated in an observation room and asked to agree to a trial of sorts. He's then administered a drug and the man conducting the experiment tells a few jokes. Ray begins to laugh uncontrollably at them. He's not even able to stop himself when they switch to stating cold facts, such as the 1994 genocide in Rwanda that killed over 800,000, or that he is serving 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. All this is taking place at the Spiderhead Penitentiary and Research Institute located on a secure island, and the program is overseen by the sympathetic and hospitable Steve Abnesti. Along with his assistant Mark, Spiderhead is a state-of-the-art penitentiary, experimenting with the effects of research chemical. The test subjects are prisoners of the state and are volunteers for the project aiming to reduce their sentence time. The inmates have their own rooms, do their respective chores, and are free to roam without guard supervision. The subjects go through daily test runs of various drugs, all of which alter their emotions and their perceptions of their surroundings. The drugs are administered through a device called MobiPack that is placed on the back of each inmate. One morning, Jeff, who is one of the inmates, is called out for remote field. He's taken to an unknown location with blindfolds on and then administered the drug titled N40, a love drug. When he takes this blindfold off, all he can think about is how beautiful the sight before him is. But in reality, he was taken to a factory site with a lot of waste and pollution in front of him. To help him with his words, he's given another drug called Verona. When he gets back into the institute, he meets his friend Lizzie in the kitchen and tells her about the experience. That night, Jeff flashes back to the reason he's in this place. He was drinking at a party and went out for a drive with his friend before losing control and crashing into a tree, killing his friend. In the process, Jeff is called into the observation room along with fellow inmate. They both show no particular attraction to each other, but once they're dosed with N40, they begin expressing their love for each other. They are also given doses of Verona to improve their verbal communication. Moments after the pair have intercourse, while Steve and Mark observe the interaction after their intimate scene, Jeff and Heather confess their love to each other. Hearing this, the observers celebrate in awe as their love drug is successful. But Steve wants N40 to not only induce love within a person momentarily, but to see if it can have lasting effects on them even after the dosage is removed. When Mark reduces the dosage, Jeff and Heather gain back their normal form and awkwardly put their clothes on and return to their rooms. Later, Jeff and Lizzie continue to spend more time together and get closer to each other. The following day, Jeff is subjected to the same love experiment with another inmate, Sarah, but this time on a double dose. His encounter with her ends up in an intense scene. The same as what happened with Heather later that evening. Jeff has to go to Mark since he got his MobiPack jostled while he was having intercourse with. Mark reminds him not to let anyone touch his device as the drugs inside could flood and malfunction the system. Next, Jeff is then called in to observe, as Sarah and Heather are sat face to face where he is to make decisions. Steve asks him to choose which one of them to give Darken Flocks, a drug that induces intense fear and psychological pain. He declines to choose, claiming he feels nothing in particular for either one of them after the effects of the love drug had worn off. Additionally, Jeff doesn't want either of them to get dosed because he knows what it feels like to be injected with Darken Flocks. Later that evening, Jeff is taken to a secure area to make a call to his girlfriend. She doesn't pick up as usual as he leaves a voice message stating that he met Lizzie in the facility who kind of reminds him of her. Maybe now he will stop bothering. That night, Jeff dresses up as Santa and goes to surprise Lizzie in her room. He gives her an early Christmas gift and the pair continue to spend fun times together. Steve attempts the same exercise with Heather, but to no avail. He has Heather and another burly inmate, Rogan, under the love drug, and later asks Heather to choose between Rogan and Jeff for injecting the Darken Flocks. Jeff learns of this and lashes out at Steve, who explains that he isn't doing it intentionally. Protocol committee wants to go on with the experiment. He further adds that Jeff and the others are actually living a free, privileged life, instead of being punished in a confined prison. No other penal institution in the world boasts such a respectful relationship between a jailer and a jail. Meanwhile, Mark begins to worry about the ethical implications of these experiments. Later that night, Steve is seen frivolously dancing around his room. When he finally rests on the bed, we realize that he also uses some of the drugs, and the positive mood he experienced just now is because of injecting the love drug. Moreover, it is also revealed that Steve takes doses of a drug to get an idea of how others feel, and Jeff learns of this when he walks into Mark administering the drug into Steve's MobiPack. The following. Later, Jeff apologizes for walking in without prior notice. Steve tells him that the protocol committee has ordered Heather to be injected with a dose of Darken Flocks, though will only last 5 minutes. Jeff reluctantly agrees. And as Heather has administered the drug, Steve records Jeff's reaction. However, something goes wrong. As Heather jolts around breaking her MobiPack and flooding herself with high doses as she lashes out, she breaks the furniture in the room and kills. This causes Mark to doubt their work in the facility. He and Steve rush to her and the latter drops his keys in a hurry. Jeff uses this moment to unlock Steve's desk and go through his journal. And that's when he finds out Steve actually owns the facility and is responsible for all these trials. There is no protocol committee. He also finds a bingo card used to name the different drugs and that the drug Mark was administering to his boss earlier is B6. By the time Steve comes back, Jeff manages to put everything back in his place. Later, Steve has a talk with Jeff about what happened. He confirms that Heather died, but that her sacrifice will not be in vain. He repeats his belief that these drugs will be the key to avoiding future accidents. He asks him if he wants something to help him with what he's going through. The two of them end up getting high together on a dose of Laadal, the drug that makes you laugh no matter what the situation. During their conversation, we get to know that Steve's father abandoned him as a child. The following day, Steve tries out a new drug. He names Foa on Lizzie. It makes her scared of anything that is in front. Later she sits with Jeff and tells him how bad her experience was earlier. They have one of their bonding moments, and Jeff confesses to her that he not only killed his friend in the car accident, but his girlfriend as well. When he was driving the car from the party, not only was his friend there, but also his girlfriend. He was charged with 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter. And it turns out that Jeff would often leave voice messages for his dead girlfriend as he missed her that much. Lizzie hugs him and they kiss. They then head to the kitchen for Jeff's. Then Steve shows up and notices Jeff's feelings for Lizzie. He realizes that this could be his chance to carry out the darkened flocks test once again. The next day he calls Jeff to the control room and reveals that Lizzie will be injected with darkened flocks without a second thought. Jeff does not agree to it, and Steve is left frustrated. Later, when Mark goes to replenish Jeff's doses, Jeff confronts him and convinces him to go against Steve and share what's happening there with. The following day, Steve tries the experiment one more time, but to convince Jeff, he makes Lizzie confess why she's actually in there. She had forgotten her baby inside a car during the summer for 3 hours and was charged with involuntary manslaughter. This still doesn't change how Jeff feels about her. And that's when he uses the control system to dose Steve. With Mark's help, he loaded up Steve with darkened flocks and other terrifying. Jeff then takes control of Steve's Moby Pack and forces him to admit the true goal of the program, which is to test an obedience drug called B6. The other drugs are merely side projects being used to put B6 to the ultimate test, whether or not the subject's actions can be controlled. It turns out that the entire time killer inmates had been consenting to the various tests. They had really been under the influence of the obedience drug, but because it wasn't working when Steve asked Jeff to dose Lizzie, thus he realized that it isn't completely. If B6 was fully ready, it could force the subject to do the very thing they'd least want to do in the world, something that they would most regret, like harming someone they loved the most. In addition, Steve informs Jeff that he, in fact, finished his sentence 7 months previously, while Lizzie's appeal for release had passed the previous week. The two of them get into a fight and Jeff forces Steve to open the door of the main entrance to free Lizzie, and that he tries to order him to hand over the pocket knife. Steve resists, and instead takes his phone and enables all 4 vials of darkened flocks in Lizzie's mouth, causing her to behave hysterically and attempt suicide. Thankfully, Jeff is able to disarm Steve, damaging his Moby Pack in the process. He then rushes to save. Lizzie successfully removes the bottles of darkened flocks from a Moby Pack and tells her he loves her. Then they tried to escape the facility. Unfortunately, Steve gets up and makes an announcement on the intercom ordering the other inmates to stop Jeff and Lizzie, and they follow it because of the drug. However, Steve's dosage is messed up in the process and he can barely keep it together. At this point, Mark has seen arriving with the authorities, so Steve has to make a break for it. Next, Jeff and Lizzie manage to thud down some of their fellow inmates who are under the influence of Steve, but the couple has to make an escape when a crowd of inmates follows them behind. Thankfully, they manage to overpower them after locking the main door behind them. Meanwhile, Mark and the police are now approaching the island, but simultaneously Steve gets on his float plane and flies away with the remaining drugs. Jeff and Lizzie then get into his boat and escape. Steve calls out for his accomplices over a microphone, but he cannot communicate clearly due to the damage in his Moby Pack from earlier. The damage causes his mixture of dosage, thus prompting him to hallucinate. Next, a joy of Steve, who is now high off his damaged Moby Pack, crashes into a mountainside. Meanwhile, Jeff and Lizzie laugh, enjoy the sunshine once again. In a voiceover, Jeff comments that self-forgiveness has to be worked on and accepted eventually, rather than being easily cured by artificial drugs. Subscribe to our channel for all the latest movie recaps. Thanks for watching.